Hello and welcome to Sam's Table. I'm Sam Black, and today I'm going to be offering my own list of decks or commanders in CEDH that I think are better than Tymna Kraum. This is going to feature some hot takes. My approach to this is not in any way data driven. This is entirely based on my own experience and reasoning and vibes. And it features some commanders that are heavily played and some commanders that are very fringe. But I'm only ranking things that I think are specifically exactly Tymna Kraum or better than that. And I don't know that I would call this an exhaustive list, but it's what I'm thinking of right now. Also, with all of this, take it with a huge grain of salt. I do think that, as I've mentioned in the past, pilot matters much more in CDH than what your commander is or how your deck is built. And there are a lot of ways to build each of these decks. And also, and most importantly, if something is working for you and it's working well, and I don't think it's good, you probably know something I don't know. And I'm probably not trying to argue that your thing or the thing that you're doing is bad. I just don't know how to make it as good as you do. So, with that said, let's talk about how I am viewing these things and what conclusions that leads to. So, first, I want to talk about what I'm looking for in a commander. The most obvious thing that a commander gives you is it offers you the ability to play cards in its colors. So, it necessarily gives you access to some cards and restricts access to other cards. But a commander being more colors is not necessarily better than a commander being fewer colors because many commanders require access to all of their colors to cast them. There are some exceptions, and in those cases, the colors that are not required are just kind of bonus opportunities that you have. But just in general, the mana in the format is very strong but not perfect, and needing to play more colors or getting to play more colors is not always better than just playing fewer colors. So while the colors offered is an attribute of the commander, I don't know that it's necessarily something that I feel like the commander is giving me in terms of like a unique benefit it's providing or anything. I like my commanders to be low mana value to give access to the free commander spells like Fierce Guardianship and Deflecting Swat. That's just a perk of playing cheaper commanders or commanders that are going to be in play more often. It's not huge, but it's definitely always a factor for me. And then the primary things that I consider outputs of strong commanders are some combination of this commander gives you extra mana to work with, this commander gives you extra cards to work with, or this commander is part of some kind of game-winning combo or enables some kind of combo. Looking at it in that way, and looking at Blue Farm, the commanders offer colors. This is a weird thing to specify, but with Blue Farm, I feel like so much of what draws people to playing these two specifically is that they want access to all four of these colors. So I think that it's worth noting. And then the primary output of both commanders clearly is card advantage. Both Tymna and Kraum just have text that tells you to draw cards. The real strength here is that neither one of them requires any mana investment to get the cards. And so this deck's strength is that it draws a lot of cards. I think that this kind of explains why this deck was so good and why I think it's so much worse now, and why I think it's overrated now. What I think the story of Blue Farm is there are two main things going on. The first is that it used to be much better than it is. And the time when that changed is when Jeweled Lotus, Mana Crypt, and Dockside Extortionist were banned. All of those cards are disproportionately good in Tymna Kraum because all of them are very good at giving you mana, and Tymna Kraum, unlike many commanders, can fully take advantage of Jeweled Lotus. And the thing that this deck needs, its cards in this 98 to provide, is mana. It has access to a lot of card draw, and it needs a way to convert that into game actions. And the bottleneck is mana. So a big part of this deck's wins when it was at its peak was regular access to casting its like Kraum on turn one, or like Rhystic Study on turn one, or in a worse but acceptable case, turn two, and then at some point tutoring for Dockside to make enough mana to do whatever you want and just like win very easily from there. Without access to that, the things that this deck's ability to use its cards and convert them into wins is much weaker. Every deck got worse with the banning of these cards, but it disproportionately impacted Tymna Kraum because of the fact that the commanders give you cards and need mana, and they're reasonably expensive. And this deck's problem is that it's slow, and that was massively exacerbated. The other thing that I think is going on in terms of the story with Tymna Kraum is that I think this deck is really, really, really good at beating up on bad decks. When you draw a lot of cards and have like a consistent, powerful game plan, if your opponents give you an extra turn, turn and a half, even half turn, you are a lot more likely to win. In general, Tymna Kraum's win rate goes up the more turns that happen because it naturally gets to develop its mana and it gets to have its scaling card draw happen. There are some other decks that can keep pace with its growth, but they're the minority. And at weaker pods against weaker opponents, the games are going to last longer. They're playing commanders that aren't as optimized to finish quickly. They aren't executing their game plans and combos and general functioning as well, so they might just take longer to win with the same draw that a more experienced pilot could win more quickly with. And all of that, if like the win rate over time graph for Tymna Kraum just skyrockets as you give it more time. I think that the top of the field is mostly decks that go very fast, which you'll see reflected in my rankings here. And I think Tymna Kraum really struggles against the best decks, but performs very, very well against weaker commanders and weaker pilots. And I don't want to like bring a lot of data into this, but I believe that this is supported by, if you had the ability to, I've had a friend talk to me about doing this, look at like when in a tournament Tymna Kraum is like winning and losing. I would guess that its like win rate in Swiss is higher than its win rate in elimination rounds, for example. So I think Tymna Kraum is powerful in its way, but just isn't offering the things that you really need to compete at the top of the format. And so now I will look at the decks that I think do a better job of that. First up, the deck that is behind. So I'm going in ascending order of how good I think these are. So up next, I have Magda, Brazen Outlaw. The things this offers are, it's a very cheap commander. It generates mana in the form of making treasures. It generates card advantage in the form of sacrificing treasures to get artifacts. And it offers combo potential in the form of finding artifact combos and it itself comboing with clock moments. Magda is very, very powerful and very hard to interact with. The problem with the deck is that for it to function, you have to play a bunch of very, very narrow bad cards. Specifically, you have to play a bunch of cheap dwarves that you can tap to get treasures with Magda to make the rest of the deck function, which means that the deck is extremely commander reliant, and the dwarves are pretty fragile, and the deck can have a real problem recovering from some kind of early sweeper or a bowmaster sticking for a turn cycle and killing all their dwarves. Having only access to red cards is a significant hindrance, but if left unchecked, Magda wins pretty quickly and extremely resiliently. And people don't play a ton of like creature removal and creature interaction, and a lot of tables really just can't interact with what Magda is doing. So while I think that the failure mode here on your dwarves get killed is too bad for this to be a top deck, I do really respect it. And anytime I sit down against it at a table, I'm really like thinking about like how much creature removal is there going to be here? How big of a problem is this? And it's generally a pretty big problem. Up next, Derevi, Imperial Tactician. Derevi offers mana. Derevi's very good at offering mana. The way that Tymna draws cards when your creatures connect, Derevi basically makes it mana when your creatures connect. But they can all hit a single opponent, and you can get as many triggers as you have creatures. So it's like a little bit better at mana generation than Tymna is at card draw in that way. And then it also offers combo potentials, mostly stuff like Emil flickering Derevi to untap Cradle to make infinite mana. The problem with Derevi, of course, is that it doesn't generate cards or a mana sink, or like, you know, it's just you're casting the spells that you draw. But in green, white, and blue, you are very good at drawing more cards, and more cards that are good at attacking for Derevi and generating more card draw are regularly being printed. And the combo potential here is very, very real. The mana abuse potential with Cradle is very, very real. I think that Derevi also kind of like outperforms other commander reliant decks in that Derevi's activated ability to be put onto the battlefield from the command zone makes it much more reliable that you will have access to Derevi. I don't love that Derevi costs 3 mana, and that, yeah, I don't know. I like what Derevi's doing. Obviously, I have it ranked pretty high above, you know, how frequently it's played and stuff like that. But I do think, you know, it's basically just a Cradle deck, and I don't think it's the best Cradle deck. Up next, Rograk Silas, another very, very well known deck that I think hasn't aged super well. Like, I think that it used to be stronger than it is now, but on average, it like gains less from new sets than other decks do. And you know what these commanders offer, because of Rograk, the commanders are cheap. I'm gonna say that it offers colors, and that's the only reason to play Silas. Like, clearly you care about these colors. And then it offers mana. Primarily what I mean is Rograk, despite not saying it on the card, like the purpose of Rograk is that it generates mana in a lot of different ways. And then Silas technically also generates a thing that you could call card advantage or mana by replaying artifacts, usually mana artifacts from your graveyard. But it's such a small part of the deck and so unlikely to really matter that I don't even really consider it a strength of the deck. This deck is very not commander reliant. It's very much about the spells in the deck. And there are advantages there. You know, you're not creature reliant. You don't care if something happens to your commanders in general. But there are also disadvantages in that everyone's starting with these commanders that offer some kind of bonus advantages, and this deck is really minimally capitalizing on that. That said, Rograk is broken. These colors are good. The deck does powerful things, but I prefer to get more out of my commanders than this is getting. Up next, Atali. I consider myself relatively high on Atali. What Atali is offering is card advantage or combo. They're the same thing-ish in this case. What it's really offering is just casting Atali is extremely powerful and can pretty easily lead to winning the game when you do it. And, you know, the disadvantage here, there are a lot. Your deck is super, super, super commander reliant. Like, the whole thing that you're doing is just casting Atali. Your colors aren't the best, and your plan is extremely face up. That said, it's not terribly easy to interact with, and due to the random nature of like what happens when a Tali resolves, people's risk management when playing against the deck is sometimes people just have to like take some risks and let you do your thing and hope it doesn't work out when it usually does. And sometimes by the time they try to interact, it's too late. Mostly, I just think that this deck is fast and consistent and a little bit resilient. This might be higher than it should be. I think that this deck has slightly limited room for like top level skill expression, but not none. And, certainly, I mean, politics are such a big part of the format, and they're certainly still big for Atali that, skill expression is going to be extremely present in all cases. But this deck, it does its one thing. Up next, the Wandering Minstrel. I've talked about the Wandering Minstrel before. It offers it offers a lot. It's a cheap commander. It offers colors strictly as a benefit. Like you only need blue and green to cast it, and you can build the deck as just blue green. And then you can also include whatever other colors you want in whatever amounts you want. It generates mana in that it makes lands that would come into play tapped come into play untapped, and then they can tap for mana, and so you have more mana than you would otherwise. And then it offers combo potential with the stuff that like returns your lands from the graveyard or escape shift or what have you. I think that the best build of the Wandering Minstrel has not yet been discovered. I think that this commander is wildly underplayed. I think that it's very clearly extremely powerful. Like the things that it gives you are just so good, combined with the ability to build your deck however you want. I don't necessarily have like a specific list of this in mind that I would necessarily prefer playing over some of the other stuff here. But just looking at the strength of the commander, I think it has to be there. And I think that over time, this will move up rather than down my list as more cards get printed that this finds good ways to interact with and better ways to build the deck get found. And it, like, basically, right now, I'm very optimistic about it, but it's a little speculative. And then once it's like, oh, the deck is supposed to look like this and it's totally broken, like I could see that happening. This is one of the few commanders that I think has the potential to be the best commander. Up next, Lotho. This is another commander that I've talked about. I think the ceiling on Lotho is probably lower than the ceiling on the Wandering Minstrel, but if I had to bring my best shot at Lotho or my best shot at Minstrel to a tournament tomorrow, I'd probably rather bring Lotho. The advantages of Lotho clearly are that it's a cheap commander that offers mana. It's very good at doing that. For more about what I like about Lotho, just look at my episode on Lotho. I think the deck's pretty good. Not the best, but strong. I could certainly be overestimating it. It's not terribly hard for me to believe that, this is just something that I've put some work into, but other things are stronger than it. But I do really value the mana that it offers, and I really value mana as a thing for commanders to offer in general. And I think that this is maybe the best commander at offering mana. Up next, Ral, Monsoon Mage. This is what I would consider the start of the like top tier of commanders. Ral is cheap. It gives you mana functionally by reducing the cost of your spells. It gives you card advantage when you ultimate it, and it gives you combo potential, the ability to ultimate it over and over. I didn't really know whether it's best to think of like the output on the Planeswalker side of Ral as card advantage or combo or both or whatever. I think Ral is very clearly the best Izzet deck. It's an extremely fast, extremely threatening, slightly more resilient than it looks commander with a really, really strong commander. It has, a disadvantage of being a little bit commander reliant, but like your deck is still just like mana and some card draw spells, and it's not that hard to like recast Ral if it's countered. this deck does kind of just have to be built as a storm deck, and in order to win, it has to do storm things, which means that any sort of dedicated storm hate, like, your deafening silence type effects, are going to be very good against the deck. But fortunately, it has access to blue, so it can play bounce spells for the stacks pieces, which gives it, a fighting chance even when people are prepared for it. Don't sleep on Rail. It's such a fundamentally good commander. Up next, Kinnan Bonder Prodigy. Very similar. A 2-color commander that offers everything. It's cheap, it gives you mana, it gives you card advantage in the form of its activated ability. It has combo potential in the form of both its static and activated ability. The static allowing you to generate infinite mana combos, and the activated being a mana sink to win when you do that. Kinnan is really like the full package. I do think that I think that the best, not just the best Kinnan list hasn't been developed, but I think the best approach to Kinnan hasn't been at all refined. I'm still very, very, very high on / optimistic about Pili-Pala. I think that it should be a big part of what Kinnan's doing, and I'm still pretty low on putting a lot of expensive cards in your deck. I think that the plan to activate Kinnan's ability and put really threatening things into play with that is very much the wrong way to approach the deck, and increasingly the wrong way to approach the format. I think that cards like Ral and the Wandering Minstrel really speed up the format from the times when like Big Flips Kinnan was like a dominant deck, and the Big Flips Kinnan thing is something that just needs turns to happen. And I think that you really want to be building toward turn 3 and turn 4 wins rather than like generating escalating value on turns 3 and 4. That said, I think the Kinnan science is a little bit behind because the deck is kind of like good enough, and then people either kept playing the good enough versions that they had or switched to other things. And I think that what the commander offers is extremely powerful, but it needs to be reimagined. Up next, probably the hottest take, Narset Jeskai Waymaster. The only thing this offers is card advantage. That's just all it does. It's not especially cheap at 3 mana. For those who are unfamiliar with the card, this is one that, just doesn't even appear on like EDH Top 16. This is blue, red, white for a 3/4. At the beginning of your end step, you may discard your hand. If you do, draw cards equal to the number of spells you cast this turn. I think that this is the commander that is best at generating card advantage. I might be biased here. Apparently, the only person in the world who regularly plays this is one of the best players, or maybe the best other player in my local play group. And so I play against this a lot. I'm very familiar with it, and I've seen how it works and how it's powerful. And I think that if you're into like Breach Storm, you should really take a serious look at this. I think that it's doing like the thing that Ral is doing, but in a pretty different way. With Ral, when you try to go off and get stopped, it can be very difficult to rebuild because you need to cast a lot of spells. And if the ability to cast a lot of spells, if you're stopped and you've spent your hand, that's kind of it for you. Whereas with Narset, you cast a bunch of spells, something happens, maybe you win, maybe you don't, and then you go to your end step and you get it all back, and then you just storm off again the next turn. This is something that I feel like I'm probably going to need to record a podcast about pretty soon, because I'm guessing that people are going to be wondering, what does this deck look like? What am I talking about? This is a commander that's, entirely slept on, and my hot take here is I think it's actually really good. Up next, Dargo Tymna. This one is actually a little bit informed by some amount of data. Really, it was my own experiences playing against it a few times and being really, really impressed by how fast, consistent, and resilient it is. And then looking into its performance and seeing that it has won a shockingly large number of very big events. And by one, I mean literal first place this year, considering how little it's played. The things that these commanders offer: Tymna offers card advantage, Dargo offers combo potential. That's basically it. But the Dargo combos are really easy. I think that this deck is just extremely fundamentally sound. I think that if you're going to play these colors, what they're very good at is finding and protecting wins. You get access to a lot of tutors and a lot of silences, and Tymna lets you put your stuff together and like get out of deep mulligans, or keep grinding when your like plan A gets stopped or whatever. And Dargo lets you just present extremely compact, extremely fast wins with minimal tutoring required. I think this deck is very much the real deal. And for anyone who's like down to not play blue, I think this is a fantastic choice. And that brings us to the obvious deck that I'm going to choose as my top deck, which is Rograk Thrasios. Of course, the deck I think is best is the deck that I play the most. I play it the most because I think it's the best. This shouldn't be surprising. The things offered here: the commanders are cheap. Rograk, especially in conjunction with green cards, is very, very good at generating mana. Thrasios generates card advantage and combo potential, so in my mind, this is really like the total package. And yeah, I don't know. I think that it's very, very difficult just structurally for any deck or any commander to be better than Rograk Thrasios ever, just because Rograk itself is so broken, and the way that it pairs with Tymna to give you two cheap creatures, colors that I think play really well together, getting a mana sink and combo finish paired with the explosiveness of Rograk is just a perfect match. Every time I mention Rograk Thrasios, I have to just say, I'm going to keep talking about this deck. And that's it. Those are my list of decks that I think are better than Blue Farm. There are a lot of other decks that I think are playable. I don't think Blue Farm is, the worst deck you can show up to a tournament with. I think that the metagame in CEDH is very large, very diverse. There are a huge number of decks that can win tournaments, including Blue Farm, and many decks that I think are comparable to, but slightly worse than Blue Farm. But as far as decks that I think maybe don't get enough attention or that, you should look at, these are my personal top choices. Again, this is not scientific at all. This is not in any way intended to be a final word on the subject. This is not even something that I've put this is a list that I generated for the purpose of talking about the decks that I think are best and the things that I'm looking for in a deck. This isn't something that I just keep a list of and I'm always carefully updating and testing all of these or anything like that. Very much one person's opinion on one afternoon. So take it with a huge grain of salt. Moving on to my closing agenda, this week's Shabbat dinner. I'm excited so my guests love a Thai curry. A lot of my guests say they'd be happy if I just served Thai curry and want me to include it in the rotation, maybe at least monthly. But I like to make sure to keep my menu varied and try different things. So I both, make a lot of stuff that's not Thai curry, and when I do Thai curry, I often try to do something a little bit new or different with it. So I usually make a red or Penang, and I have, some vegetables that I like the most. I usually use a lot of I guess the one vegetable that I use the most just in all cases is eggplant. I make a ton of eggplant dishes. Eggplant, I just love eggplant. But for this one, I'm trying to do something a little different. So I'm making a masman curry with apples and tofu and green cabbage and peanuts and potatoes and onions. And I'm going to top it with like garnish with cilantro at the end, lime juice. But I'm a big apple peanut butter as a snack guy. And I think of Masman as kind of a little bit more of a kind of milder vegetables type curry. Oh, I'm going to include some red peppers in here too, I think. It wants some color, right? Like you don't want the whole thing to just be beige. So some red peppers and the cilantro at the end, I think will really help with like presentation. I wonder if I should get some carrots in there for color also. I'll think about that. But I'm excited about the cabbage as a good kind of base to give a little texture to the potatoes are a very kind of like thick, bulky, doesn't integrate super well kind of base. And I'm excited about the cabbage's ability to just kind of like give a little more texture to the sauce, kind of. And I really like the idea of giving it some apple sweetness to pair with the peanut. And I'm going to use a little peanut butter. I really like apple peanut. And I think that the crunch and sweetness, but a kind of a mild sweetness, like not going as intense as like a mango or pineapple or something, should play well here. So that's the agenda for dinner tonight. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back next week.